Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Nun Aleph. We're on top of the Amid at the Mishnah. It says the Mishloiki so in Boidoim. Now we're back to the halachas about Tmana, which means wrapping a warm pot, using some materials for insulation to keep it warm for Shabbos. Now we know there are two stipulations that need to be abided by in order to allow to be mater Tmana for Shabbos. Number one must use materials which are not moisef hevel, which don't emit, don't generate heat. Why is that? We're concerned perhaps that he might use ashes which contains coals, and he might go ahead and stir those coals on Shabbos to keep his pot warm. Number two, it needs to be done before Shabbos. A hatmana with any sort of material, even a material which is not moisef hevel, can only be done if it was before Shabbos. Says the Mishnah, loiki so if you had not wrapped the pot from before Shabbos, it's too late. Once Shabbos comes, once it gets dark, he cannot insulate his pot any longer. Why is that? Let's take a look at Rashi inside, fifth line from the top. Says Rashi, parishna taima. We've already explained that the reason, why the Chachamim prohibit one from being toimnin bedavar she'ein moisef hevel, even using materials which are not moisef hevel. What's wrong with that? Mishach hashech can't do it on Shabbos. Once it gets dark, gezerah, there's a gezerah shema yartiach. Perhaps he might find that his pot has cooled off. So when he goes to insulate it, he sees that he has cold food, he might be inclined to go ahead and reheat it on Shabbos itself. Therefore, Chacham said, don't go ahead and initiate a hatmana on Shabbos itself. It's only if he did it before Shabbos, then it's okay. Continues the Mishnah. Ki so v'nizgala. What if he already insulated his pot, he covered it, v'nizgala, somehow it got uncovered. Mutar l'chasoisa. So now even if it's already Shabbos, he can go ahead and cover the pot again. Why is that? Since it's not considered to be initiating a new atmana, it's not called matmin mitchila, because it was already covered miboidayim on Erev Shabbos. We consider it to be one hemshech, a continuous, uninterrupted hatmana, and is not included in the isser of being matmin b'Shabbos. So even if the pot became uncovered before Shabbos and remained in that state into Shabbos, and I realize, I have a pot without insulation, you can go ahead and restore that insulation. Taisus points out that when the Mishnah says kiso v'nizgala, mutar l'chasoisa, implying that it happened on its own, says Taisus, even if he personally removed the atmana, for instance, it's Shabbos now and he removed the insulation, he himself is being megala the pot, he can go ahead and restore that atmana. In this case too, we consider it to be a continuous atmana, and that's allowed. However, says Taisus, if he was megala the atmana before Shabbos, he removed the covering on Erev Shabbos, but he did not restore it until Shabbos arrives, in that case, as Tosfos, is considered to be a matmin betchila, considered to be initiating a new atmana, and that's also because there was no atmana during the entry point of Shabbos. At the onset of Shabbos, this pot was uncovered. So how can we consider this to be a continuous atmana? It is only when the atmana is a Shabbos-dik atmana. This atmana relates to Shabbos. It was present during the onset of Shabbos. Then we can consider this to be a continuation of the atmana. So even if he removed the atmana on Shabbos, he can put it back. Since this pot was mutman on Shabbos, it was insulated at the entry point of Shabbos. So it's not considered to be a new atmana, initiation of a new atmana on Shabbos. It was already mutman on Shabbos. It already had a Shabbos-dik atmana done to it. However, if he goes in and removes the atmana on Erev Shabbos, by doing so he terminates the atmana. So even though he had already insulated Erev Shabbos, but once he removes the atmana becomes interrupted, becomes terminated. And now when he wants to restore the atmana on Shabbos itself, we consider it to be an initiation, a new ma'aseh atmana, and it's also. The Rosh, however, maintains that even if he is megala, he personally takes the hatmana off the pot on Erev Shabbos with the intent purpose, with the kavana. He's planning on restoring the hatmana come Shabbos. Even in that case, says Rush, it's okay. Because here too, even if there was no atmana at the onset of Shabbos, we consider this atmana on Shabbos to be merely a continuation, a yamshech of the previous atmana, and is not considered to be a new atmana, and it is mutter. Okay, so till now we discussed being matmin, a pot, a warm pot, to maintain its heat. What about insulating something cold, to keep it cold? Continues the Mishnah. One can fill the container with cold water and place it underneath a pillow, underneath a mattress. So you can do that to maintain its cool temperature, to protect it from the sun, to protect it from the heat. So it's okay. He can take a container with cold food or drink and insulate it even on Shabbos. Apparently there's no concern in this case, the concern of Shema Yartiach, that Rashi mentioned that perhaps he's going to go and do a malacha by reheating his food. When he initiates the Atman on Shabbos, that certainly won't apply to insulation of a cold item, food or drink. Continues the Gemara. Omar Rabbi Damar Shmuel, Mutar lahatman satzoinen. One may insulate a cold item, once again, to protect it from the sun, to protect it from the heat. As long as he doesn't have the kavanah, he's not intending on warming it up and increasing the temperature of this cool item. Just the opposite. He's trying to maintain its cool temperature. Amar Rav Yosef, my kamashmalan. Well, what is Rav Yehuda Shmuel coming to teach us? Tanina, we learned it in the Mishnah. Memale adam kitain. One can fill a container with cold, v'noitan tachazakar tachazakeses, and place it underneath some form of insulation. So this is allowed. It's clearly stated in the Mishnah. And once again, we're speaking about a keses, as Rashi points out, things that are not ma'aseh hevel, and therefore there's no concern. So what is Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel teaching us? One man insulate a cold food or drink. We know that from the Mishnah. Amarle Abaye. So Abaye responds to Rav Yosef. Actually, Tuva Kamashman. He's teaching us a great chiddush here, a halacha that we would not have known from the Mishnah. Why? If only from the Mishnah, perhaps I would say, Hanemili, the davar shein dark lahatman. Perhaps the Mishnah is speaking about an item, an object, which is not the common practice to do hatmana to it. Rashi says, for instance, mayim etzoinenim. So this is Rashi, right? The second Rashi in the Gemara. Rashi says, even masnisan hava mina hanemili. Says Rashi in San Kigoyin, for instance, mayim etzoinenim, cold water. Shein darkan lahatman. It's not the common practice to insulate them, to bury them tachasakar v'keses lechamaman, to warm them up, to increase their temperature somewhat. Shein mischaman b'kach, because merely increasing the temperature slightly, it doesn't do justice to the water. One who wishes to warm up water wants hot water. Merely increasing it slightly, it doesn't justify. It's not sufficient. So therefore, it's not the derech to attempt to warm up water, to increase its temperature somewhat by placing it under a karvakesis. Evidently, the common practice is merely to insulate cold water and keep it at the cool temperature, not for the sake of warming it up. Hilkach says Rashi lekel lemegzar. There's no concern here. There's no concern at all, because the general practice is to do it only for the sake of insulating its coldness, keeping it at the cool temperature. But there's no kavana, no intention of warming it up. Avol, says the Gemara, dabar shadark lahatman. But something which is a common practice to go ahead and warm it up. For instance, says Rashi, al dabar shadark lahatman lechamim, to warm it up slightly. Can you go and tafshay, solid food, where it is something that is done to go ahead and increase its temperature slightly by placing it under the karvakeses. So perhaps in that case, you cannot do that. Why can't he do that? Because then, if he's going to go ahead and insulate it for the purpose of increasing its temperature, that will fall into the category of atmana b'Shabbos. There's an issur to go be matman, to insulate something for the sake of increasing or maintaining its heat. Once again, the reason for that is because of a gzera shami artiach. He might go ahead and cook up the food on Shabbos. He might reheat it on Shabbos. So perhaps, as Abaye, there's a reason to differentiate. There's room for distinction between water and a solid food. Water is generally not placed under a karva keses to increase its heat. It's generally done for the sake of maintaining its cool temperature. So there's no concern. However, perhaps by a tafshil, there will be a concern because it is derech to place it under a insulation, under a karva keses, to increase its temperature slightly. So even a cold tafshil perhaps cannot be insulated. I'm concerned that his intent and purpose here is to warm it up, and there's a concern of Shamir Tiach. So once again, from our Mishnah, perhaps we only derive the halacha of liquid, of mayim tzoinenim. But tavshil perhaps is also kamashmal, and therefore we did Mishmol needs to teach us, yes, that one may insulate something which is cold under a karva keses on Shabbos itself, even tavshil, even solid food. Once again, if his intent and purpose here is merely to maintain its cool temperature, he has no kavana to warm it up, even to increase its temperature slightly. That is the way Rashi learns the Gemara. Amar Rav Huna Marav, Asur la'atman satzoinen. What may not insulate a cold item? V'atanya, but haven't we learned? Rebbe hitel la'atman satzoinen. Now there's a gersa here that says Amar Rav Huna Amar Rebbe Asur la'atman satzoinen. So apparently this is the gersa that we're going to follow, because the Gemara's kasha was to pose a stira, apparent contradiction between Rebbe, who says that it's asur la'atman satzoinen, and Rebbe found in the Brisa which says that it's mutar la'atman satzoinen. This is a stira, Rebbe on Rebbe. So once again, Amar Rav Huna Amar Rebbe asur la'atman satzoinen. Hatmana by tzoinen is prohibited. V'hatani, but haven't we learned in the Brisa? Rebbe hitel la'atman satzoinen. Rebbe allowed hatmana by tzoinen. So the Gemara kasha, it's not difficult. It depends on what point in history. The Brisa, which Rav Huna, who quotes Rebbe as saying that it's asur la'atman satzoinen, this took place when? When did Rebbe state this? Isser mekamei, before the shamei mi Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, before he heard the halacha from Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi that it's mutar, so he maintained that it's asur. The Gemara soon will tell us, relate that incident. So before he heard the halacha from Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, he maintained that it's asur. However, the Brisa, which quotes Rebbe as being matar, is discussing a point in history, lebasar, the l'shamei, after he heard halacha from Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, who said that it's mutar. And in fact, on account of that, Rebbe himself retracted his opinion and conceded to Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi's opinion that's mutar. Says the Gemara, as we will see in the following story. The Yosef Rebbe was sitting, and he said, asur la'atman satzoinen, one cannot insulate even cold. Amar lefanav Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, Abba, my father, meaning Rabbi Yossi, my father hitel la'atman satzoinen, he allowed hatmana by tzoinen. Okay? Said Rebbe, Omar, Rebbe said, responded, the elder sage has already ruled, and I bow to his ruling, and therefore from now on, I am also going to be matir hatmana by tzoinen. Omar Papa, take a look at this. Come take a look. Look how the Talmidei Chachamim cherish each other and respect each other and hold each other in such high regard. How do we see that? She'ilu Rabbi Yossi kayam, because if theoretically Rabbi Yossi would be alive today, he would sit in a subordinate fashion, in a bowing position lifnei Rebbe, meaning with utmost humility. Although Rabbi Yossi was a greater Talmid Chacham than Rebbe, however, he would accord him the greatest respect due to the fact that Rebbe was a Nasi. How do we know that Rabbi Yossi would have conducted himself in that manner? He's not alive today. How do we know? Says the Gemara, because Rabbi Shmuel, his son, the Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, who took the place of his father. He replaced his father, meaning he was just as great in Chachma and scholarship as his father. Nevertheless, when it came to Rebbe, he would sit subordinately in front of Rebbe on account of Rebbe's position, high position of Nasius. So, if Rabbi Yossi was so great, conducted himself in this manner, and accorded Rebbe this great respect, presumably his father as well would have done the same. So on one hand, they accorded such great honor to Rebbe, and on the other side we find that Rebbe as well responded in kind, and Rebbe responds and relates to Rabbi Yossi by saying, Kvar hoira zaken, the elder sage has already ruled. That's the final word here. I bow to his ruling. So we see the tremendous cover they had for each other. they respected Rebbe, and in turn Rebbe respected them. He respected Rabbi Yossi. Farazak is referring to Rabbi Yossi. So he respected Rabbi Yossi, held him in such high regard. So you see how much the Talmid Chachamim are machavev zeh, they cherish each other, machavev each other. Continues Gemara. Omar le Rav Nachman, the Doru Abdi. Rav Nachman instructed Doru, his servant, as follows. He gave him two instructions. Number one, Atman leitzoinen, go insulate something cold, even on Shabbos, that's allowed. Number two, va'aisi limaya, go bring me hot water, the achim, that was warmed up, heated up by kfei l'arma, by a non-Jewish cook. So he gave him two instructions. Shama Rav Ami heard this incident, the ikvid, and he objected. He didn't like what he heard. Rav Yosef, what's the problem? My time, ikvid. Why do you object to Rav Nachman's instructions to his Eved? On both accounts, he's right. On both halachas, he's following his teachers, Rabbeim. Kirav Vasavid, he's following his teachers. Chada Kirav, v'chada Kishmol. One halacha is in accordance with Rav Shita, and the other one in accordance with Shmuel. As I want to explain, the halacha which followed Shmuel was that one may insulate Zainin. Kishmuel, he followed Shmuel with regard to the halacha of being matman at Zainin. The Amar Vidamar Shmuel, this is what we learned earlier in the beginning of the Gemara. Mutal atman at Zainin, one is allowed to be matman, insulate Zainin, even on Shabbos. So he was simply following his Rebbe. Regarding the other halacha of drinking water heated up by a non-Jewish cook, there's no concern about Bishul Akim here, about eating something which was cooked and heated up by a guy, which is asur. Why? Because this is different. He followed the Shita of Rav, who told us, Kirav, the Amar Rav, Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Amar Rav, Kol shehu nechal k'may shu chai. Any type of food which is edible raw, ein boi mishum bishulei nachrim. There's no concern about a guy cooking it. Why? So Rashi in Beitz explains that since it's edible raw, the guy didn't do anything. He didn't improve it. It's not significant. The fact that he cooked it up carries no value, no significance. Therefore, it's not included in the isser of eating bishulei nachrim. So what's the matter? Why do you object to Rav Nachman's way of life, to his instructions to his Eved? What's wrong with being matman the tzoyin? What's wrong with drinking this hot water? Says more, nevertheless, even though it's mutter, according to the letter of law, indeed this was mutter. V'hu savar. However, Rav Ami figured this was still inappropriate. Why? Adam choshev shani. A prominent, important person must conduct himself differently. He's meant to have higher standards. Why is that? Because the public expects that of him. They hold him in high regard. They expect him to maintain higher standards than the rest of the public. Therefore, even though according to the strict letter of the law, these things are mutter, he's meant to be machmar himself. There's another pshat that Rashi says over here in our Gemara, because one who observes him might lead him to actually be makel more, to apply more leniencies. Why? Because it's based on the same concept that he holds the Adam Chashav, the prominent person, on such high regard. So if he sees him doing something lenient, doing a kula, for instance, drinking this water, which was cooked up by a guy, since he expects the Adam Chashav to be on a higher standard than himself, so he figures, okay, if this is okay for the Adam Chashav to drink this water, then perhaps I can downgrade, I can go a step lower. And in my standards, according to my standards, I could do something even more lenient than that. He's going to apply even more leniencies to his lifestyle. Therefore, Adam Chashav is meant to maintain a higher standard and not to resort to these types of leniencies. Okay, so in summary, we begin from the Mishnah. The Mishnah told us that Hatzmana, insulating something with a material which is not Mosef Hevel, is mutter, provided that was done by Doim on Erev Shabbos. The Mishnah told us if he covered it on Erev Shabbos, but it got uncovered, he can go ahead and cover it again, even on Shabbos. Tosfos points out that even if he personally took off the Hatmana on Shabbos, he can go ahead and restore the Hatmana. But Tosfos points out that if he took off the Hatmana on Erev Shabbos and left it in that position, in that state, until Shabbos arrives, and now he wants to restore the Hatmana on Shabbos, that is not allowed, because that's considered to be an initiation of a new atmana. Since this atmana was not a Shabbos dik atmana, it didn't relate to Shabbos. It wasn't in a state of atmana when Shabbos arrives. To begin a new atmana, to initiate a new atmana on Shabbos itself, certainly that's also there's a concern that he might go ahead and reheat his food. Now, what about insulating a cold item? One would like to maintain its cool temperature. He has no kavanah of increasing its temperature. The Mishnah told us that's mutter, and indeed the Gemara concluded that not only is it mutter with regard to cold water, but even for a tafshel, for solid food. Now Rashi points out that this discussion about allowing hatmana on a davar tzoinin on Shabbos only applies when he has no kavanah of increasing its temperature. The point is merely to protect it from the heat and maintain its cool temperature. But if the purpose here is to increase its temperature even slightly by placing it under the karvakeses, that is asur, because that too falls into the gzera, is included into the decree of Isur Hatmana on Shabbos, for concern that he might go ahead and reheat the food, Shamiyat Tiach. Here too, when he's trying to increase the temperature, there's the same concern. If you're engaged in increasing heat, there's a gzera that you might go ahead and reheat it, recook it on Shabbos. However, other Rishonim, like the Ran brings the Rambam, which disagrees with Rashi, says even if his kavanah here is to slightly increase the temperature of the cold water, of this cold food, it is also mutter. There's no concern of gzeira shemayar tiach. Why? Because only by hot or warm foods where we intend on eating it hot, there indeed is a concern that he might go and reheat it on Shabbos if he finds it to have cooled off. But in this case of tzoinin, where apparently he had no intention of consuming it hot, there is no concern of shemayar tiach. So according to those Rishonim, we look at the subject matter. We look at the object. If it is a object which is soinen, that was never included in the gzera of the Chachamim, and indeed one may initiate hatmana for its soinen on Shabbos, even if he's trying to slightly increase its temperature. Continues the Gemara, Tanur Rabban, we learned in a brayso. Afal pi she'amru, although the Chachamim instructed us as follows: Ein toimen, one may not insulate afilu bedavar she'ein moisav hevel, even using material which don't emit heat. You can't do it on Shabbos, as we discussed. However, in bala haisif, if there was already hatmana done, this pot is insulated from before Shabbos, he could go ahead and add some insulation on Shabbos, because that's not considered to be a new hatmana. He's not initiating anything new. The pot was already covered, it was already insulated, and therefore it's mutter. Continues the brayso, Keitzad hu oiseh. So Tosfos brings a shita that is not goyrus these three words, because Rav Shimon Gamliel coming up is actually not coming to interpret, to explain the Tanna Kama, he's coming to disagree with him, because the Tanna Kama holds that if he wishes to be moisef, to add some insulation, that's okay. But perhaps if he wants to switch the material, the insulation material, that's asur. That's considered to be a new hatmana. So even though the pot was already mutman, was already insulated from before Shabbos, but he can't go ahead and switch the insulation. We look at the material that he's insulating it with. It must remain the same. He can add to it, but he can't go ahead and replace it. According to Rav Shimon Gamliel, however, that's mutter. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, noitel sadinen, if he wishes to upgrade the heat level there, he can go ahead and take these thin sheets off and replace it with something heavier. Or maniach hasak glufkin, place a heavy coat on it. Or alternatively, in the summer, if he wants to downgrade the heat, he can go ahead and noitel sat glufkin, could replace the heavy coat and put the maniach hasasidin in place instead of it, some thin sheets. So according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, not only can he add, but he can also replace. So according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, we look at the pot, at the content of the food. It was mutman, it was already in a state of hatmana from Erev Shabbos. It's irrelevant what type of materials are being used. Meaning, as long as he continues the same atmana, whether it's with the same materials or switching to other materials, it is mutter. Tanna Kama, however, maintains no. It's considered to be a new atmana because he's using new materials. Continues the brayso. We have another leniency, another kula stated by Rav Shimon Gamliel. V'chein hoya Rav Shimon Gamliel lo yasru. When is this isra of atmana applied? It is only ela oisei mecham, if he's trying to be matmin the initial pot where the food is cooked in. That he can't do on Shabbos. Aval pino mimecham l'mecham. But if he goes ahead and transfers the content of the initial, of the Kli Rishon over to a Kli Sheni, to another vessel, and he's actually cooling off the content by doing so, because he's taken for a blazing Kli Rishon, and he's transferring it to a Kli Sheni, he's cooling it off. In this case, it's allowed. One can be matmin the second pot. Why? He's going to explain. Why is it mutter? Hashta, now that we see, oikure komekirla, he is engaged in cooling off the content of the pot, because he's transferring it to Kli Sheni. Artuche kamertechla, do you have a concern that he's going to try to reheat it on Shabbos? Certainly not. There's no concern with allowing him to be matman on Shabbos. What is the concern? He may go ahead and find a pot that's cooled off and go reheat it on Shabbos. We see that he's not so concerned with the high level of heat of his food, because he's transferring it to a Kli Sheni. So in this case, says Rav Shimon Gamliel, one can go ahead and be matman even l'chatchila on Shabbos over the Kli Sheni. So in summary, we learned a brayso which told us that to be moisev atman on Shabbos is allowed, even if he's doing it on Shabbos, because this item was already mutman from Erev Shabbos. It's not considered to be a new atmana. What about to switch the insulation material? According to the Tanakam, it's aser. We view it as a new atmana. According to Rav Shimon Gamliel, it's mutter. And Rav Shimon Gamliel adds another kula. He says if he transfers the item into another mecham, into a second pot, there too, it is mutter to initiate atmana even on Shabbos. Continues the brayso with several more halachas about atmana. Toman, if he wrapped the pot, vikisa, and covered it bedavar hanitel b'Shabbos, using materials which are not muktzah, or oy toman bedavar she'ein hanitel b'Shabbos, or he wrapped the kedera, he surrounded using materials which are not movable, which are muktzah, v'chisa, but he covered it bedavar hanitel b'Shabbos. So he used as a lid, he used a davar hanitel b'Shabbos, like a kli. So in both cases, he has full access to the content of his kli. How is a noitel maser? He can go ahead and pull out the pot from the insulation, because there's no muksa getting in the way. So he can take it out, and when he's done, put it back. But taman v'kisa, but if he's surrounded and covered using material which is muksa, or he surrounded the pot, wrapped it with a davar hanitel b'Shabbos, a non-muksa material, but the kisa b'davar she'ein hanitel b'Shabbos, but he covered the pot using an item which is muksa, then we have a problem. If the pot was somewhat, a little bit uncovered, then noitel maser, then he has no problem about the muksa, and as Rashi says, he merely tips the pot, lets the lid which is muksa fall down, and he can lift the pot, takes some of the food and put it back in its place. But if the muktzah lid is completely covering this pot, in that case he has a problem. He cannot pull out the pot to use it. He can't take it and return on Shabbos because there's a muktzah concern. Explains Rashi, what is the muktzah concern? So this is Rashi back on Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the bottom. It says Rashi, when he purposely, intentionally places a muktzah item on something else, nasa basis ledavar aser. So the barrel, in this case the pot, becomes a basis, forms as a base. It is serving the davar aser and is muktzah. So therefore, if the muktzah item is completely covering the pot, he cannot access the pot. However, why is it different if the muktzah item is somewhat removed off the pot? It is a bit, the pot is a little bit megula, a little bit covered. Why is that different? Says Rashi, if the pot is somewhat uncovered, there's no concern of tiltal, because he's merely tilting the pot, and the lid falls down on its own. And the question here is once again, but the pot is a bus, it's a davar aser. How can he even engage in tilting this pot? So the Meiri explains that in the case where the lid was not fully covering the pot does not become a basis, davar aser, because it's not placed properly on top of the pot. Therefore, it's not in its proper place, and it's not considered as though the pot is supporting a properly placed muktzah item. Therefore, in this case, the pot is not a basis. He can engage in handling the pot. He merely needs to tilt it so the kisei, which is muktzah, falls off, and then he can go and lift the pot outright. Taisus learns differently. Taisus says that there's no concern of muktzah here whatsoever as regarding the pot. Why? because the pot in this case is not muktzah. Because since he has intent and plans to go ahead and remove the muktzah item on Shabbos, he has a das to remove the muktzah item from the pot, it is not muktzah, because basis, in order for something to be considered basis lavar aser, we require that the muktzah item will be present there throughout the entire Shabbos. But in this case, since he has a das to remove it on Shabbos by tilting the pot does not become a basis and is not considered to be muktzah. Other Rishonim explain, I believe it's the Ran who says that the pot doesn't become a basis asur regardless. Why? Because the basis means that the base is serving the muktzah, is forming a support. It is a foundation. The term basis, Rashi explains, it comes from the Targum. Esakir ve'eskani. This was the kir, the vessel used to store the water, to wash from it. In the Beis Hamikdash, the Kehanim would use it for kiddush yadayim raglayim. So the pasuk says esakir ve'eskani. What is kani? The base. And the Targum says besise. So besise is referring to a base. It's like the English word of a base. So it's only when the base is supporting, is upholding, is coming to serve the meshamash the muktzah. However, says the Ran in this case, what is serving what? Who is being meshamash what? Is it the pot which is serving the lid, or is it in the reverse, that the lid is serving the pot? Certainly the lid is serving the pot. Therefore the pot is not a basis davar asur. If so, how do we explain the Gemara that if he covered it completely, then he can't access the pot, but if it's partially uncovered, he could? The pshat is that we're speaking about that the installation was placed not only around the pot, but also it covered, it surrounded the pot even on top. So he has no access to his pot. He simply can't get through the muktzah installation to get to his pot. It's not a concern about the pot being muktzah. He's going to come into contact with the muktzah installation, which is above, which is getting in the way, obstructing his access to the pot. Therefore it's a problem. However, if it's megula miktsasai, there's somewhat access to the pot isn't completely covered with the muktzah, so then he can put his hand through and lift the pot. Continues the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Na'ira shel pishtan daka. These fine na'iris is chaff coming from the flax. If it's fine, then hari kazevel, then he cannot use it for atmana, because it is ma'aseh hevel, just like manure. Continues the brayso, manicha mecham gala mecham. One can place a hot pot, a kettle on top of another kettle. Ukadera gaba kadera, a pot on top of another pot. Kadera is usually a earthenware pot. And Rashi actually takes out the next two words, avaloi. And we continue kadera gaba mecham. We can place a pot on top of a kettle. Mecham gaba kadera, a mecham, which is referring to some say a copper kettle. You can place it on an earthenware pot. V'tochas pia b'batzek. And he can go and seal the upper container using batzek, dough which was kneaded before Shabbos. Now what are we speaking about? It says the Brayso, v'loi bishvil sheyicham. We're not speaking about placing a cold item on top of a hot item to warm it up. Why is that? So Taisus explained in the beginning of the parak, because there's a concern that if he leaves it there long enough, it will come to the point of bishul. We're speaking about that the lower container is very hot. So we can't even leave it there for a short while, just simply to warm it up, because there's a concern that it might lead to bishul. So that's not allowed. Ella, the only way that's allowed, bishvil shayu mishumarim. We're speaking about that both containers are hot, and he's really trying to maintain the heat of the upper container, placing on the lower container. Continues the price. Just like one may not do atmana on Shabbos, one can't initiate atmana of a hot object on Shabbos. Kach ein toimnes atzoinin. Similarly, the Isser Atmana applies even to tzoinin, food or drink as well. One cannot be matman on Shabbos. Rebbe hitter lahatman atzoinin. This was the Rebbe that we mentioned earlier, who allowed hatmana by tzoinin. As more related, he came to this conclusion as a result of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yosi, who quoted his father, which allowed hatmana by tzoinin. So once again, the Brayso here is discussing doing things on Shabbos. He can place the mecham al gabe mecham, etc., but not to do atmana b'tzayin on Shabbos, and Rebbe allows. Concludes the Brayso. Ve'ein meraskin, some agoris with a samach, a meraskin, one may not crush on Shabbos, like shell, like snow, like borrowed hail, b'Shabbos. B'shil she'izu b'meimov, so that the liquid will flow. He can't go ahead and actively do a ma'aseh to melt it. As Rashi says, This is the Rashi Divrei Masla Kadeshi Yezuva Meimav right here on the side. Why Mishum de Kamoiled b'Shabbos? Because he's creating something on Shabbos. It appears like a malacha. V'domil malacha sheboirei hamayim ha'ilu. He's creating this water. So one may not do so on Shabbos. Aval, however, noisin hu l'sech hakoyis. He can place this sheleg bara, this ice, into a glass of liquid, even in the summer, and he knows it's going to melt in there. Into a bowl of food. He has no concern about melting it because he's not doing biyadayim. He's not actively doing a maisa to melt it. He's merely placing it there and will melt on its own. There's no concern there. Hadron alach b'ameh toimne. Continues the Mishnah. B'ameh behema yoytze. U'b'ameh ina yoytze. Now we're going to discuss the halacha of shvisas behemte. Let's take a look at Rashi. The first Rashi, the Mishnah. B'ameh behema yoytze. Says Rashi. Lefi because she'odam mitzuveh. Al shvisas behemte b'Shabbos. One has a tzivui. One is commanded to have his animal refrain from doing malach on Shabbos. Now we're not speaking about locking the behemoth up, not allowing to chew grass on Shabbos. Since that's something of pleasure for the animal, one is not meant to be metzar the animal on Shabbos to cause him discomfort. However, one cannot allow his behemoth to do a malach on Shabbos, something which otherwise doesn't provide pleasure to the behemoth. For instance, allowing him to carry a load. And as Rashi points out, we learn this from the Pasuk, Pasuk tells us that even the animal is meant to refrain from work on Shabbos. Continues Rashi, Umidi de mintrabe behema. Anything that's required to control the behema with it, to safeguard, to secure it, to restrain the behema. For instance, all these types of apparatus is used to all kinds of leashes, etc. So these things are allowed. Havitaksha, it's like an ornament that's considered to be a item of apparel. It's like the clothing one wears in Shusarab. That's allowed. It is batal to the person. We don't look at it as a separate entity. We don't look at it like a load. So again, it's takshit. V'urcha, it's considered to be the normal manner, the customary way of an animal walking on Shabbos and going out on Shusarab on Shabbos. It's not considered to be a masui load. Below you have a masui. However, umida de loy minturbe. If he should carry an item, an object which is not required for controlling, for restraining the animal, have masa is considered to be a load. So Mishnah will list us several different types of leashes, of gear, which are appropriate and suitable for different types of animals. Says the Gemara, what type of gear can a behema wear and take out with it to Shusarabim? With what can the behemoth not go out into a public domain? A camel can go out wearing this afsar, some sort of rope, some sort of muzzle tied around his neck, some say around his tied to his mouth. So that is a necessary item for the control of the to safeguard, to control and restrain this gamal, and therefore it is not considered to be a masui. A different type of animal called a na'aka, which is a more feisty type of creature that requires something more secure, a chatam, a nose ring. So it's to place the nose ring there and go ahead and some say go ahead and tie a leash to that nose ring. So this is required for the ni'aka, since it is a more feisty nature. It doesn't suffice with merely an afsar. It's not sufficient to keep it at bay, and therefore an ni'aka is justified in going to Shusarabim wearing a chatam. V'luvdikim, these more wild donkeys from Luv. Some say it's Libya, some say it's Egypt. So these were larger and more aggressive, and they require a prumbia, a metal bit in their mouth to keep them secure, to keep them in control. Visus, a horse, b'sher, he requires a band, a strap, some type of chain around his neck, where they go ahead and they attach a ring to it and attach a leash, and they control in this manner. So each creature, each animal has something specific based on its personality, based on its character, on its nature. Continues the Mishnah, V'chol bali asher yotzei mishir, any other type of animal which generally wears this share, this chain. For instance, Rashi says a hunting dog. So they can go out and Shusarabim wearing the share, Rashi says, because it's considered to be lanoi, an ornamental item. Benim shachem b'shir, it can be pulled with this shir. The Gemara will explain what this means. Umazin aleim, one can sprinkle the efer paraduma on the animals that are wearing, even when they're wearing the shir. So if the share, this chain becomes tamei, one can sprinkle the efer paraduma on it, even while it's on the behemoth. We're not concerned perhaps that he's going to confuse things and intend and spray it onto the behemoth first before going on the chain. By doing so, the water in the ezoiv, in the plant that he's spraying from, becomes puzzle. There's no concern there. If this share requires tvila, one can be total even when it's on the animal. There's no concern about chatzitza, as the Gemara will explain. Okay, let's go ahead and explain and interpret, define some of the things in the Mishnah. My na'aka b'chatam. What exactly is this na'aka? What exactly is this chatam? Amar Rabba Rav Chana, na'akta chibrisi, we're speaking of a certain species of a camel. A white na'akta, a female white camel of this species, which is of a feisty nature and requires bezama with the parzla a iron nose ring. Continues the Gemara, veluv dekim beprumia. So what does this mean? Omar Avhuna chamra luva, a Libyan donkey which was larger and more aggressive and requires more to restrain it. Bepagi de parzla with iron bits, iron mouthpiece. So that is required in order to secure, to keep this chamra luva at bay. Continues the Gemara. Levi Shadar Zuzi. Levi sent some money to some contacts in to Lebei Chuzai, which was in Bavel. Rashi says that this place was actually a 6-month trip to the to Louvre, to the place where you get these Libyan donkeys. So he sent some money over there, and he asked him Lemiz ben Chamra Luva, to purchase for him a Chamra Luva. He wanted a high quality donkey. Saru, Shadrule Sari. So they wrapped up the money and they sent it back to him together with Sari, with some barley for good measure. What was the message here? Lemeimer. They meant to tell him as follows: you're looking for a high quality donkey? Why bother with a 6-month trip to Louvre? Lemeimer, they meant to tell him the nigri de chamra, the footsteps of a donkey, Sa'ari, are based on the feed. If you feed him good barley, he'll perform well. You'll have a high quality donkey. This whole trouble is unnecessary. Continues the Gemara, Omar Vida Mashmo. So the Mishnah gave us a list of various types of leashes, of apparatuses that are designed, that are suitable for each animal based on its character and its need. So what about if something is switched around? So there were those who asked the following kasha, the following halachic shaila in front of Rebbe. What if you are machlif? What if you switch things around? For instance, you take the gama, which is a tame animal, and all it requires is a simple afsar, a muzzle, and instead you upgrade its security and you apply a nose ring. So is he allowed to go out to Saram with that? Or in the reverse, if you take this feisty na'aka, which requires a nose ring, and you downgrade the gear, or you simply put a basic afsar on it, is that okay for Shabbos? So once again, machlif and l'fnei Rebbe, they switch things around for Rebbe, and they ask the question: Shel zu b'zu ma? What if you switch things around, you upgrade or downgrade? Is it okay? Says, well, let's analyze the shaila. Na'aka ba'afsar lo tiboilach. If one downgrades, that certainly is not okay. For instance, he takes this wild na'aka, and instead of putting a nose ring, which is appropriate, which is necessary to safeguard it and to restrain it, he puts a simple afsar, a simple muzzle. Certainly that's not a shaila. That is considered to be a load. Why? Kiven dulei mitrabe, since the animal is not restrained with a simple afsar, it's unsuitable. It's inadequate. A masahu, it's certainly considered to be a load. Kiti boilach. When then do you have a shaila? What if you upgrade things? You add an added measure of security. Gomal b'chatomai. For instance, you take the camel and you place a nose ring on it. So you add to the security. Is that okay? So although the animal doesn't require it, but you decided you want to add an added measure of security, you're comfortable putting a nose ring on your gamal. Given the sagle ba'afsar, since it is sufficient, the animal suffices with a simple muzzle. So by upgrading it, maser is considered to be a load. It's not considered to be urcheyu, as Rashi. It's not considered to be the tachshit. It's not considered to be subordinate to the animal because it's not generally used for this animal. Or Dilma perhaps, something which is applied for excess restraining, that is not considered to be a masui. Niturusi Yisera, excess restraint, lo yamina masui, is not considered to be a masui. Amar Lefanov, Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. So once again, Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi presented to Rabbi as follows: in the name of my father, Kachama Abba, this is what Rabbi Yossi said. Arba behemoths. There are 4 behemoths. Yoitzes ba'afsar, that go just around wearing the afsar, the muzzle. What are they? Hasus, a horse. Hapered, a mule. Hagamol, a camel. V'chamoyer, a donkey. Says the Gemara, why did he list specifically these 4? Limute mai. What is he coming to exclude? Lav limute gamol b'chatam. Apparently, he's trying to exclude something. He's trying to say that a gamol can only go out wearing a simple afsar. But if you choose to add an added measure of restraining by putting a nose ring on the gamel, that's a masui. Says no, that's not what Rav Yossi is trying to indicate. Loi, rather he's trying to exclude something else. Limute naka b'afsar. Downgrading is asur. If he takes the naka, which requires a secure nose ring, and he simply puts on it an afsar, that's useless. It's inadequate. There's no purpose to it. It's considered to be a masui. So we still don't know. What is the halacha regarding an itirusi yisera? If he adds an additional measure of security, is that considered to be a masui or not? It says in Masnisatana, in the Brisa we learned, Luvdikim, this Libyan, this aggressive Libyan donkey, the gamal or a camel, yoitzim ba'afsar, may God just around wearing the afsar, the muzzle. The fact that the Brisa merely lists only 2 items, the Luvdikim and the gamal, it doesn't complete it with those others that are listed in Rabbi Yossi's list. Apparently, Brisa is being very specific and is trying to indicate something to us. That yes, a gamal could only go out wearing an afsar, but if he wears a khatam, which is something which is unnecessary, it's an added measure of unnecessary security here, it's considered to be a masui. So in summary, what types of gear may animal wear on Shabbos? We begin with the Mishnah, which tells us that the lower level, the sheer, the simple chain band around the neck is applicable to a sus. The afsar, the muzzle, to a gamal. The chatam, the nose ring, to an aka. And the prumbia, those metal bits, for a luvdikim. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi tells us that my father, Rabbi Yossi, actually had a list of 4 behemoths that go out wearing a simple afsar. They are the sus, the horse, pered, a mule, the gamal, the camel, and a chamar and a donkey. In the Brisa we learned that the luvdikim and the gamal both go out wearing an afsar and Rishus Rabbim. Now the Rishonim point out that there appears to be some sort of discrepancy between the shittas here, but it's really not so, because although the Mishnah tells us that a sus is meant to wear a share, and Rabbi Yossi says a sus is meant to wear an afsar, so sometimes they would apply a share and sometimes an afsar. Both are appropriate measures for the sus. The same thing regarding the luvdikim. The Mishnah tells us that a luvdikim wears a prumbia. The Brisa tells us that a luvdikim wears an afsar. That too is not a stira, because sometimes they would apply a prumbia and sometimes an afsar. Therefore, they're both considered to be appropriate measures and are not considered to be a load on Shabbos. Continues the Gemara. Okay, getting back to our question, what if one upgrades the level of security, excessive restraint, nitirusi yisera? Is that mutter or not? If he places a nose ring on a simple camel, is that considered to be a masui? Says Gemara Kitanoi. Apparently, this question is reflected in the following machlekes Tanoi. We learned in the Brisa, Ein chaya yoitze b'soiger. A chaya cannot go out wearing a collar. Chanan yoimer yoitze b'soiger. He can go out wearing a collar. Uv'chol davar mishtamar, anything needed to restrain it. Says Gemara, what are we speaking about? What type of chaya? B'may askinan. What are we speaking about? Ilayma b'chaya gdoila, a large animal like a bear. Misagala soiger. Is a collar sufficient? Certainly not. Therefore, it doesn't provide any sort of restraint, any sort of security, and it's considered to be a masui. Perhaps we're speaking about a small animal like a weasel. If so, why does the Tanakama prohibit? Isn't a collar perfectly suitable for the chayak tana? And it should be mutter. So what is the machlokes? El must be speaking about chatuli kebenayu. A cat is the point of contention between Tanakama and Chananya. Tanakama Savar, he holds given the sagala b'misna balma. Since for a cat, a simple cord is enough, is sufficient, and therefore if he chooses to place a collar, masuyui, it's an unnecessary measure of security and it's considered to be a load. So we see that adding security unnecessarily, according to Tanakama, is a load. V'chananya savar, no, kolin turusi seirasa, excessive restraint is not considered to be a load. Lo yamrina masa is not a load. So therefore we see that indeed this question we discussed earlier is based on these shitas. According to Tanakama, adding unnecessary security is considered to be a masui. Like in the case of a chatul, of a cat, according to Tanakama, you meant to use a chevel, a cord, a rope, a collar, is unnecessary. According to Chananya, one can place even a soiger, a collar, because in Turasi Yisera, an added measure of restraint and security, is not considered to be a masu, lo yamrino and masu. Okay, says the Gemara, so it seems pretty clear that our original shaila regarding the Tirusi Yisera, if one were to choose to add an unnecessary measure of security to his animal on Shabbos, is it considered to be a masu load? So it's pretty clear that it's a machlekes tanoi. So whose opinion do we follow? Says the Gemara, Omar Rav Huna bar Chia, Omar Shmuel, halacha kechananya, that it is okay, it is not considered to be a masu. Continues the Gemara with a story. Levi, who was the son, who was brei to Rav Huna bar Chia, and the Rabbi Rav Huna, so these two were traveling, have a ka'azli bu'urcha, they were traveling on their donkeys on the road, and kadmei chamra de Levi, so the donkey carrying Levi advanced, went ahead of lechamra the Rabbi Rav Huna. So he advanced past the donkey of Rabbi Rav Huna, he went ahead. Now, between these two, Rabbi Rav Huna was the greater one. So chalash daite, the Rabbi Rav Huna. Rav Huna felt bad. As says, he was the gadol, he was the greater one of these two, and he thought it was done deliberately, and he took it as an affront. Omar, so Levi figured, he said, Eimele Milsa, let me tell him something. I'll put his mind at ease. I'll indicate that it wasn't intentional, it was something that just happened, my donkey pulled me ahead. Omar, so he asked him the following shaila. Chamor, one has a donkey, Shasaka Varoim, who exhibits errant behavior. Could go in there like this one here, that, look, you see, he pulled ahead. This type of feist is this donkey with this type of aggressive nature. Can he go out into the shram carrying the prumbia, these metal bits in his mouth to restrain him? An ordinary donkey doesn't need that, but perhaps this one's different. Amar lei. So Rabbi Rav Huna responded, Hachi Amar Avucha, Hachi Amar Avach, your own father said in the name of Shmuel, Hachi Amar Avach Meshvei de Shmuel, Halacha Kechananya, that indeed the halacha follows Hanani's opinion, that the Nitirusi Yisera, if one chooses to add additional measure of security to his animal, it's okay on Shabbos. It's not considered to be a masoi. So certainly this chamar, which seems to be of aggressive nature, it will certainly be in place to apply the prumya and carry it out even on Shabbos. So, time for a chazara on today's daf. We began with the Mishnah, which told us about hatmana on Shabbos. One can use material which is not Mosef Hevel only if he is matman v'bayjoyim on Erev Shabbos. Now, if he did hatmana but it got uncovered, he can go ahead and cover it back even on Shabbos. And even if he uncovered it himself, he can go ahead and put back the hatmana, Tosfos points out, provided that he covers it again before Shabbos. But doing hatman on Shabbos, being matman initially on Shabbos is asur. What about being matman soinen? As Rashi points out, if it's the point is to protect it from the heat, it's mutter. But to increase its heat, that is asur even by soinen. The Gemara told us that if something was already covered before Shabbos, one can add to the hatman on Shabbos. According to Rav Shimon Gamliel, he can even switch the materials. And Rav Shimon Gamliel tells us, if one transfers the content of the first pot into another pot, he can do atmana even on Shabbos. There's no concern that I'll go ahead and reheat and recook the food on Shabbos. The Brisa continued with various halachas of atmana, and we continued on to the Mishnah. A person is obligated to refrain to have his animal refrain from doing malach on Shabbos. However, something which is required for the animal itself, something required for the restraining of the animal, for the safekeeping of the animal, is mutter. The Mishnah listed several types of leashes, which are suitable for the different types of animals depending on their nature. The sus has the share, the chain around his neck. The gamal uses the muzzle. The na'aka, which is the wild camel, uses a nose ring. And this aggressive Libyan donkey uses the prumbia, which are the metal bits inserted in his mouth. Rabbi Yossi told us that the sus, the parrot, the gamal, the chamar are meant to use the afsar. The Brisa tells us the luvnikim and the gamal can use the afsar as well. The Gemara had a shayla regarding upgrading the nature of the leash, adding an added measure of unnecessary security. Is that mutter? The Gemara says, according to Chananya, it's mutter. For instance, the collar may be placed even on a cat, because the terusi is seira, an added measure of security, is not considered to be a masui. And we end up with the story of this errant donkey. And the question that was asked as a result was, can he place the prumbia on the donkey on Shabbos? And he responded, certainly he can do so, because adding security is okay. It's not considered to be a masui on Shabbos.